Oh, let's move on to our major concern. First topic I would like to talk about is called rate graph. After you got the amount of the substances, say for example the reactant or the product, and then with the time taken, you can plot this kind of graph. For the y-axis, it is the amount of the substance, and it can be reflected by maybe the mass of it or the volume of gas evolved or being absorbed or the absorbance. Because all these parameters, they are directly proportional to the amount of the substance. So when you are plotting this weight graph, there are so many variations. As long as that parameter can reflect the amount of substances, then you can put it in the y-axis. However, for the x-axis, say it's a horizontal one, it must be time. But it depends on the duration of the reaction, the time. There are so many units for it. Maybe minutes, maybe second, maybe hours, maybe 100 years. It depends on what that reaction is. Oh, and if you really look into the relative amount of the product 1 and 2 first, why is their amount increases? And why the reactant keep on decreasing is the first question. And then if you study the equation, can you tell me why the product is at a higher position at the end than product 2? 明唔明兩條問題啊？諗一諗先。product 嗰啲咧就上升緊嘅 ，reactant 嗰啲就跌緊啦。點解？第二點解 product one 咧最後出嚟個 level 咧係喺 product two 嘅樓上？Oh, for question 1 first, why reactant keep on decreasing? But actually the answer is very stupid because it is the reactant. So it will be used up finally. Can you see the idea? So therefore the reactant, of course, its amount is decreasing. And for the product, of course, its amount initially it should be 0. And then finally it will become some positive number. And go to the second question, why product 1 is more than product 2 at the end? Can someone suggest a reason? Product 1 and product 2 嘅分別係咩？ Okay, because of the ratio. Can you see in the equation given below? For product 1, when 2 of it is formed, then only 1 of product 2 is formed. So then at the end, you can see that the ratio should be 2 to 1 in ratio. Can you see the relationship between these two lines? So up to this point, any question? Or if no, then try to analyze the graph by plotting several lines on it. Is because for the measurement of rate, if you remember that it should be the delta in the amount divided by delta t, and this is the equation for rate. And there are two types of rate. For average rate first, how can you find out this value from the graph? Amount of the change in amount per unit time. How can you obtain the value from the graph? If I turn it into some mathematics, the amount, it should be the y-axis, is it? The y-axis. And then the time, you can call it as the x-axis. So what you are really finding out is the delta y divided by delta x. How can you find it out? Okay, someone suggests something exists in M1 or M2 dy over dx, and you are actually finding out the slope of it. Can you see the idea? 你揾緊嗰個 delta y 嘅改變啊嘛 ，I mean delta y 嘅改變添。你揾緊 y 嘅改變啊嘛，係嘛？除翻 x 嘅改變啊嘛。如果咧你用翻普通 math 啦，你唔淨係計一點嘅嗰個嘅話咧，我哋 for the average rate we can apply this equation. for two particular time interval, maybe time 1 and time 2, and then you would like to find out the rate of it, you are just applying this equation, y1 minus y2, and then divide the whole term by x1 minus x2, and this is actually the relationship of the slope。咁其實你計緊嗰條 curve 嘅 slope 啫嘛，係嘛？ So let's try what are the difference between the average rate and the instantaneous rate. For the average rate first, because it is easier for you to understand. Say for example, if I want to represent the average rate of product 2 from T0 to T1， 我想問咧，而家呢一個 product 2啦，用 product 2嚟表達嗰個嘅 average rate of 個 reaction 嘅話啦，我定咗兩個 time 喺度啦，咁啊 T0 啦，一開始嗰個數啦，跟住 T1 啦，佢好似啱啱差唔多完 reaction 嗰個嘅位嚟啦嚇。Oh, and then for this case, how can you find out the average rate? Is that you just join these 2 points by a straight line and then calculate the slope of it. You're joining these 2 points with a straight line. And then the corresponding amount of product 2 should be y0 and y1 respectively. And after you got these several coordinates, then you can calculate the rate of it easily. And just join the 2 points and then find out the corresponding value of y, and it will be equal to y1 minus y0, and then divide it by T1 minus T0. And that's the way how can you obtain the average rate between 2 particular points of reaction. Oh, how about instantaneous rate? What's the meaning of it? Instantaneous. When we are finding the instantaneous slope, which of the quantity will be changed to 0? Which of the value? Instantaneous 即係解瞬時咁解啦 ，at a particular moment only. Then, what is the relationship between T1 and T0 in that case? They are very close or they are very different from each other. 明唔明條問題啊？如果我揾緊一瞬間嘅嗰個 rate 嘅話啦 ，T1 同埋 T0 嘅關係係點？好接近定係差好遠？ It is also related to the method how we can do the data analysis. 一瞬間即係點啊？佢哋兩個嘅 difference 好趨向零啦，係嘛？佢哋好接近零嘅。得唔得？咁其實我哋只係揾緊咧一個 point 上邊嘅 slope 啫嘛，係嘛？咁一個 point 上面嘅 slope 咧 ，Maths 入邊叫咩？叫做 tangent. So that if you really want to find out the instantaneous rate of a particular time t, then we should draw a tangential line on that particular graph and then find the slope of it. And this is the difference between these 2 types of rate. And again, maybe I consider T1 again. I would like to find out the instantaneous rate at T1 represented by the amount of product 2. Then I draw a tangential line here. And be reminded the meaning of a tangential line is that it touches with the curve with 1 point only. And it also fits the meaning that T1 minus T2 it tends to 0, isn't it? When the 2 points are coming together, and then their distance is 0, nearly 0, I mean, then it will just be one of the points. Oh, and then after you have it, you just find out the slope of this tangential line.咁你畫咗條線之後咧，你求其喺呢條 tangential line 你揾到兩個 point，因為你成個 coordinate plan 咧咁啊，是但揾兩個 point 計佢 slope 就搞掂啦。咁呢個就寫唔到條式俾你啦嚇。雖然都得嘅，夾硬畫兩個出嚟咯。Oh, and finally, give you one more types of rate. We call it initial rate. And I give you the definition for initial rate, and you try to think of how can you obtain the answer from the graph. And initial rate, the meaning of it is the instantaneous rate at time equal to 0. And just show me your step. How can you obtain the initial rate from the graph? 嗱，結合咗幾個 concept 啦，呢度啊。第一就係話你應該畫就咁連埋嗰兩點啦，定抑或畫條 tangent 啦。第二就係話你喺邊一點度畫條 tangent 或者邊一點度做連線咧。What is your choice? Drawing a tangent. If I use another color to draw the line. And if I draw this tangential line, then it will be the initial rate represented by the formation of product 2。因為我哋對住第二嗰個 product 嚟畫㗎嘛，係嘛？咁呢個就係用 product 2表達 initial rate of 呢一個 reaction 嘅方法嚟啦嚇。And for the same reaction, you can actually representing the rate of reaction by using its product and also its reactant. Just one of it, then that is enough. So the another way of it is that you may use product 1, and then the tangential line will be shown by the ruler here. 你亦都可以由另一個 product 度計佢出嚟。咁但係計完出嚟個數咧，佢會唔同嘅。例如佢呢個 case 入邊咧，佢個數值會 double 咗嘅。得唔得？因為佢 form 出嚟個 amount，因為個 mole ratio 嘅問題啦。你如果用 product 1咧，表達佢個 rate 嘅話咧，佢就會係1倍嘅。So this is another way you can represent the initial rate. However, this time you are in terms of product 1. How about the third way for this reaction? 第三個方法係咩？畫完兩個 product 啦，用佢嚟表達完個 initial rate 啦。And finally, 仲有咩？我哋個 reactant 咧 ，reactant R, we can also use it. However, for the data treatment part of it is a little bit complicated than before. We have to add a minus sign because we always want the rate of reaction is a positive number. So if you really want to represent the rate of reaction by the reactant, always add back a minus sign before it, so that the tangential line, you calculate the slope first, and then the rate will be equal to minus the slope of this tangential line. So is it clear how to do this analysis? 就不斷畫線嘅，睇你畫啲咩線啦。Average 嘅就揾兩點啦 揾條直線 join 埋去揾 slope 啫。如果係 initial rate 嘅 instantaneous rate 就畫 tangents 啦，跟住揾 slope 啦。Or after finding out the value of it, you have to add back the unit yourself, and you can actually refer to the parameter what you are using. Say for example, if you are using mass, then the unit should be maybe gram per unit second or gram per minute. It depends on what parameter you are using. 咁你自己睇翻 x、y axis 各隻 unit 係咩，咁自己砌就搞掂㗎啦。咁啊，不過呢度冇實質用啲咩啦嚇，後表版會有嘅。咁就後表版先一齊砌啦。So the conclusion here is that how can you monitor the rate of reaction? You have several choices. You can monitor the volume of gas against time, but not only measuring its volume. 咁先至係完整嘅成個方法嚟啦。如果唔係你只係 measure 緊佢嗰個嘅 quantity 咧，就唔係 measure 緊個 rate 啦。Then the next page, more analysis and an example with some numbers for you to try. Then page 4. And more on a rate diagram. For A first, and you study this graph, which of the x or y is in excess and why? Or which of them is the limiting reagent in the chat box? Y is limiting or in excess? And y is limiting, and the answer is obvious, isn't it? Because after the reaction, you drop to 0. It means that it has been used up at the end. So that it should be the limiting reagent. And on the contrary, for x, there is still some amount of x at the end. So that it should be in excess. And then question 4, why the slope at T1 equal to 0? And the meaning of slope is that the rate of reaction. It means that at that particular point, the rate of reaction starts to become 0. What is the reason behind why the reaction stopped at that particular moment? And then after it is still rate equal to 0. 我因為嗰隻嘢已經 react 晒啦，係嘛？個 Y 已經用完咗啦，咪冇得再行 reaction 咯，係嘛？ and the final question about the graph is why the slope on reactant X is different at different points of reaction. And obviously it drops, the reaction rate drops. Why? 你見到佢個 slope 一路咁樣冇咁斜啦嚇 become less negative as time proceeds. And what is the reason? If you have no idea, then just randomly pick an example. Maybe this one. And I use the concentration of them to represent the rate of reaction. And then what happens when time proceeds? Why the reaction rate become lower and lower? 同咩有關？有啲咩會影響佢嘅 rate 啊？Why the chance in collision？ 有同學話啦，嗰個撞擊嘅機會率細咗啦。點解一個撞擊嘅機會率細咗？隨住時間改變，有啲咩令到個撞擊機會細咗？their amount decreases, or more precisely, their concentration decreases as time proceeds, because some of them has been reacted, so their chance of collision decreases, so that the rate of reaction rate decreases. And this is the whole idea. Can you see it? And you learned it in the collision theory already. 即係有啲咩條件令到兩隻嘢 react 啫嘛？要有撞擊啦，撞得啱位啦， 同埋佢哋夠快啊嘛個 kinetic energy，先至可以 overcome 嗰個 activation barrier 啦。我提翻個 effective collision 嘅 meaning 係咩啊？就係話滿足頭先嗰幾個條件咯。佢哋有撞擊啦，撞得啱位啦，佢哋夠能量啦，撞嘅時候，嗰 type 嘅 collision 就叫 effective collision 啦。And this time because the concentration decreases and then the effective collision decreases in chance, so rate of reaction decreases. If okay, then I can give you another example. And you think of the meaning of this graph. The first question is, are they X and Y reactants or product? And the question is, which of them is in excess or limiting? And another evidence is that after time equal to t1, the slope becomes 0. 呢幅 curve 個 system 又有咩特別 ？Which one is limiting reagent? Or which one is left behind? And finally, what type of reaction is it? 佢哋 react 緊 to form W 同埋 Z 啦，佢哋先至會 decrease 成慢慢噶嘛，係嘛？所以佢哋 react 嚟啦。咁跟住咧，邊一嚿嘢係 limiting？咁有疑惑嗰啲就再問下一條路。有啲咩嘢 system 入邊咧，先至到最後咧，點都會有啲嘢剩翻喺度。點先會 react 唔晒啊？佢哋 slope 係零，應該已經停咗啦。個 reaction 表面上係嘛？有啲咩 system 先至會有呢個狀態？一個 equilibrium 嘅 system 啊，有同學答咗啦，得唔得？如果我哋真係做到呢啲咁嘅 graph 嘅話咧，其實佢係一個 equilibrium 嘅 system 或者一個 reversible 嘅 system 咧，就會出到呢啲咁嘅圖噶啦。Oh, and if you understand, then just try the example below with some numbers in it. Be reminded that you should be careful about the term instantaneous rate and average rate and what kinds of line you should draw. Or can you draw these several lines? And then just very easy calculate the slope of it and then turn it back to our positive number, and that's it. after you calculate the slope, and then you just convert it back to a positive number, and then finally you add back the unit. Now the y-axis, the unit is number of moles, and then for x-axis is minute. So then finally you combine these together. So it will be mole per unit minute, and that's the unit.個 B、C 自己計啦嚇，簡單咩事嘢啫？咁咪用我幅 graph 就呢幾個數啦嚇。咁出到去會有個 buffer 嘅位俾你嘅。咁雖然年年個 range 都唔一樣啦，佢會嘗試望住啲答案整個 range 出嚟嘅，唔好太過分就得啦。